Welcome to the Your Message Received podcast. And now, taking your message to the finish line, your host, John Duffin.
Hey folks, John Duffin here with Duffin Media, and welcome back to another episode of Your Message Received. Your Message Received is the platform, the home, to help you find your best, most true, most authentic business voice. Hell, your most authentic voice. Get what you want, find what you need, improve your results, make billions of dollars, find a person of your dreams. We can't guarantee those last two, but we're working on those right now. All the other ones we feel really good about. And I am thrilled that you are joining us again today. And folks, we got a good one. We've got somebody who, to me, just embodies the sense of great energy and a master in communications. I use that word absolutely intentionally. From Mastertalk, I'm introducing Brenden Kumarasany. Welcome to the show, sir.
Pleasure's mine, John. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. It's like, so, folks, Brenden and I met each other in 2020, February 2020, at the Burchard High Performance Conference in San Diego, California. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience for me. And I can remember Brenden's enthusiasm and energy. Brenden, what do you remember? I don't mean in detail, but like the things that like resonated as you just shared with me off stage, so to speak, that you get to a lot of high performance summits. What were some of the things that you remember about that in regards to why it mattered to you?
Yeah, for sure, John. Love that question. You know, for me, going to personal development conferences is always about the people. You know, we can listen to content on podcasts and take notes and take action, but the real value of getting together is to meet other incredible people like yourself, because you don't know who's behind the headset, who's actually listening to these podcasts and these conversations. So when you put them all into one room, like Brenden did at HBX or really any other conference, you create an explosion of energy and everyone just feels like they already know each other. And that's the fun. That's why I always spend so much time at these conferences.
What was the first conference you attended?
The first conference I attended, which we actually talked briefly off camera as well, was actually Lewis Howes's conference, Summit of Greatness. That was the first one I went to. I went in September of 2019, a few months into my corporate career. So back then, you know, Mastertalk was more of a YouTube channel. I wasn't really trying to make it a business. It was more of a hobby.
Yeah.
So Lewis's conference was actually the first one, and it changed my life significantly.
So when you left the conference, were you more clear in regards to this is going to be what I'm going to do? What you, like I said, you were coaching, you were speaking, you were presenting. Is that when you realized you can do that?
Yeah, that and so much more, John. I mean, one, I got super lucky that I met my business partner at that event. And
Did you
me and him-
really?
yeah, it was. I met him at a 5 a.m. workout at Summit. So that was a big win for me. That alone was worth everything and beyond. He's been so great to me. So that's one piece. Yeah, go ahead.
You just said the 5 a.m. You just said the 5 a.m. workout. I remember.
Yeah, it was.
They did it. I didn't go to it. I went up, like, take a walk away, and it's like, and you meet your business partner. It's a great reminder, folks, as to optimize every inch of these conferences.
And optimize I did, John.
Yeah.
The reason I optimized it, so we're on the same page. Brenden doesn't wake up at 5 a.m. He doesn't work out in the morning. I don't do that stuff. I'm 9 a.m. Okay, I'm in that club.
Okay,
but the reason I got, yeah, that's me, right, as well. But the reason I got up in the morning was specifically because I wanted to meet the other people who got up at 5 a.m. Who's crazy enough to be there? And on top of that, for those who are listening who don't have the context, how Summit works is there's a bunch of different workouts. And there's one, I don't know if you remember this, John, from 2019. It's called the Deck of Pain. So it's by a guy named Steve Weatherford, who's one of the best punters in the NFL.
And I know who you mean. Yeah.
So that guy was actually there leading that training. So I picked the Deck of Pain on purpose. There's only 50 people there at that training, and Vamsi was the guy next to me.
Oh my God. So let me ask you, right? So back then, as you're putting yourself literally in a position to succeed and to win and to learn and to evolve and all that stuff. But this is where, doing my own math, you were not that far out of college at this point, right? I mean, that you're taking these leaps at what I'm going to say is incredible, that you got all this going on and you're barely out of school. Did I read correctly in terms of school, that you did a project, part of your project that was to go after funding for something that matters to you, and that you secured funding as a result?
I wish I secured funding, John. So let me tell you the story, but you're definitely on
Please.
the right track there.
Right.
So I started coaching when I was 19, but it was an accident that I got into the space. I actually never wanted to be a communication coach. I didn't know that was a thing. Like, my parents were factory workers. I wasn't looking to change the world here. I actually have a bachelor's degree in accounting. Not a lot of people know this. So I studied to be a numbers guy. But then in that journey, I started competing in case competitions. Think of it like professional sports for nerds. Other guys might be playing football. I was doing presentations. And I started coaching those students. That's how I learned how to speak. So the funding for my YouTube channel came from my personal salary. As I was working at IBM as a consultant there, when I came back from Summit, I said, I need to stop making videos in my mother's basement. It's time to go pro. So I hired my best friend and I paid him a lot of money to make my videos for me.
So let me ask you, were you always, you said I was in accounting, my family, factory workers. Were you always confident in regards to literally at first, these first steps of putting yourself out there, so to speak? Were you always confident?
Great question, and it's worth mentioning. Definitely not. So actually most of my life I struggled with communication, John. And the reason is because I grew up in Montreal. So for those who don't know, Montreal is a city where you need to know how to speak French in Canada. And I didn't know the language, but I had to go to French school. So my whole life, not only was I scared of communication, I was presenting in a language I didn't know. So I'd look at the crowd and go, bonjour? That was my life growing up as a kid.
So I'm embarrassed to tell you, I took French, let's see, high school, college, my return to college, independently. So I'm going to say I probably had it for about 18 years. My entire, other than bonjour and bonsoir, my entire with French is, I can say I am a red tie, because I don't know, never remember the verb for wear. So that's the best I get. I watched you deliver. It was a video presentation that you did. It's on your website. And folks, if you're listening to this part about barely knowing the language, we're going to identify the website of mastertalk.ca. And literally front and center is this gentleman giving a dual language, bilingual presentation in English and in French. So apparently you're a quick study, man. Of mastering a language. I remember seeing how powerful that was, that you did that. How long did it take you to go from I can barely, I'm in Montreal, I can barely say anything other than bonjour, to feeling confident enough that you could speak in multiple languages?
I mean, very kind of you to watch that video, John. So I would say 2 years to know French.
Wow.
Because when you're young, you learn languages really quick. It's not because Brendan's special here. It's because I grew up in French school. So if you don't know the language, you can't talk to anyone. So I had to learn fast. But in terms of being confident on the stage, especially the video,
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I wish it was a quick study. That's 15 years, right? Because from 7 to maybe let's say 20. I think I was 22 when I did that specific video. So that took a long time for me to get comfortable switching languages and doing public speaking in French, which I had a lot of insecurity around when I was younger.
How did you get past it?
How did I get past it? Absolutely.
No.
So here's the way that I think about this, John. When we think about fear and anxiety, I've never seen it as something that we need to try and remove, but rather a dichotomy that we need to learn to manage, like a marriage. So let me give you an example of what I mean here. Let's say we take a boxing match, where one side of that boxing match is the fear, the stress, the anxiety that comes with communication. And the other side of the ring is the message. Why does this matter? Why is this important? Why should I even go through the trouble of doing this?
Mm-hmm.
The goal is never for the fear to leave the boxing match, John, but rather make sure that when both meet in the middle of that ring, that your message wins the match every single day of the week.
Mm.
And how does that apply to me? The reason that applies to me is I had every excuse in the book not to do Mastertalk. Broken left arm. I had a surgery when I was younger, still crooked to this day. You know this because you met me in person. Right? That's one piece. Another piece is, look, I struggled with communication most of my life in a language I didn't know, and I got a bachelor's degree in accounting. Why did I think I could be a great speaker? Because I did it for the 15-year-old girl who can't afford a communication coach. No one's making videos for her, so it might as well be me, or it's nobody.
So you were able to then remember or the pain that you felt like you went through from literally a physical perspective and in terms of a confidence perspective, you could channel to other people. Am I understanding
That's
that correctly?
correct. And
okay.
absolutely. And what Taki Moore says best, which I completely agree with, is usually every why is attached to a who. So there's a who, a somebody that's really exciting for us, that really drives us. And for me, it was very vivid. It's very very obvious, which is when I do a lot of pro bono work for where I'm coaching young teenage girls on how to speak. I feel their fear, like they're red in the face, they're scared of communication, and I realized that I was the only person who actually cared about serving them. Like, because you can't make money off these girls, right? You can't sell them coaching packages.
No. No.
Right?
But why
Right.
did it matter to reach them? That's what I was going to say. Like, why was that important? You know, that's the part. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and it's evolved over time, right?
Right.
But I think for me, and it could be the 15-year-old boy too. For me, that person that excites me is Elon Musk. Because when Elon was 10 years old or 12 and he was living in South Africa and he's being abused by his dad, and he's the genius. Like, he's going to do, yeah, sure, he's made his mistakes. No, there's no doubt. He's made a ton of mistakes in his life. But at the end of the day, he's created a crap ton of human innovation. But nobody sat him down and said, hey, you're going to be a genius someday. You should probably learn how to communicate effectively. So if we had done that with him when he was 10, he would be a completely different human being today.
Exactly.
Right? So for me, the question is not about Elon, because he doesn't need me anymore. He's successful. But the point is, who's the next Elon, and what are we doing for her? Because we don't know who the next Elon is. It might be a 10-year-old girl in Cambodia, but I know for sure 90% of the next Elons can't afford me. So I need to create everything for free, or else they'll never learn.
That's really powerful. And I love how that feels. Like I said, and like I remember for myself that it's like that I used to be terrified to say what was true and accurate on my mind. My whole thing was I had no problem with being a people pleaser. I just, for some reason, you know, my background or whatever, it was always like that part was fine. But saying what was really on my mind was really terribly difficult. And that's my thought is the same, which is that it's like, I know I can't be the only one in the world that was feeling that way. So that's hence like one of the reasons is important. Really, the primary purpose of having someone, and I'll say you specifically, on my show is because I want people that are feeling in any way uncomfortable at any age. That applies to older too. Like for me, I'm more of the mindset of like 40, 50 plus, where they feel like they've plateaued and are having younger people pass them, right? And they can't rely on just what was. And so that's why it's really important for me to bring on communications experts, because that it's like, I do believe these are learnable. I do believe these are learnable skills and learnable traits. And Brenden, I love the way, the specificity in terms of the way that you break things down. I think it's really fun. What was the do you remember the first presentation that was memorable for you?
The first presentation that I gave or that I heard?
First one that you, I love that. Let's go with the first one that you heard, and then we'll go with the first one you gave. First one that you heard that was memorable.
I would say the first memory. I'm sure there might have been one earlier, but the one that comes to mind was definitely Scott Harrison's keynote about Charity Water.
Okay.
So when Scott, who was the CEO of Charity Water, it's a nonprofit that helps people gain clean access to water, when I saw him speak, I was like, wow, this guy's actually doing something important with his life. Whereas me, I'm just trying to be, I mean, there's no offense to accountants, but like I'm just trying to make money, be an accountant. But he was doing something really big with his life. And that's what really made it memorable for me is this guy's life is on the line. If he doesn't speak well, he can't raise millions of dollars for his charity and people die. And when you have that level of accountability when you present, you're going to be like amazing. So there's one piece. In terms of, for me, the earliest memory that I have is probably my first case competition. So when I was 19 and I had competed in these business things, I had no idea what I was doing. I had an oversized suit, an oversized tie. And for some reason, the executives and the CEOs, they really liked us. So they gave us third place. That was probably the most memorable one because we made a commercial for their thing. We did the whole spiel. So it was a really memorable experience, and it was really fun because they gave us like train tickets to Toronto. And we had steak dinner, and it was fun. And I didn't have any money back then, so for me, it was like, oh my god,
That's
a $50 steak, crazy.
Right. But it is great, and it's a great reminder of what can matter. I read, like, that's what I think. You've just brought up something in regards to, like, you talk about impact and the importance of impact. And you brought up charity water. And I remember that was one of the things that you've spoken on that, for God's sake. And part of your storytelling, you've spoken on that. And I love the fact that you use that as like the first memorable presentation that you've heard. It obviously, like, just based upon doing just looking at what you've delivered, it obviously still matters to you, right? I mean, in terms of that's great. That, in terms of the storytelling, impact is something it's so hard to quantify, but to me, it's so terribly important. When do you know, or whether you hear in someone or when you speak it yourself, when you've delivered impact?
Great question, John. I would say for me, there's two facets to that. Impact in the way that they communicate their ideas to the world. And the second piece is really how do you create the impact in general in your life. So let's focus on the communication side. What I would say, it's really a couple of things. One, it's the technique side, which is how's your eye contact? How's your facial expressions? How are you communicating? So if I say something like, yeah, John, the next Elon Musk is like a 7-year-old girl. Like you're not bought into my vision. Like this guy he's just trying to eat some egg rolls today. He's not trying to create a vision. I don't think this guy gets off his couch. So that's the illusion that we're creating. So that's one piece, is the technique. We got to refine that. Because if we don't have the foundation, it doesn't matter how good the story is, it doesn't matter how good the vision is, it's always going to fall flat. And then the other piece to impactful communication, especially from a vision perspective, is the ability to explain the future in a way that people today could understand it. And that's somebody like Steve Jobs has done so well. And why did he do that? Or how did he do that, rather? He didn't just talk about the iPhone. He talked about how it was different from the BlackBerry. Look at this BlackBerry. You're typing on this keyboard. It's not a very good experience. Why don't you just have one screen on how you're approaching this? And that way you'll be more successful, right? So what he did is he used the past to explain the future. And then the third piece is the willingness to constantly communicate the same idea over and over again until it becomes impactful. Like the first time I guested on a show, I sucked. When you do this a few hundred times, you get asked the same question again. Now you're able to answer that same exact question that you answered 3.5 years ago, but you can do it in a way that hits the bullseye every time.
I love this. Hey, I saw you touch on that before, so here's my follow-up question to that. What's your favorite fruit? What's your favorite day of the week? I loved the video where you talk about the repetition and the sense of you literally practice a question every day for 365 days and know that nobody's going to ask you a question such as, what's your favorite fruit? Or what's your favorite day of the week? As you say, I get asked the same questions all the time. Is that still true? Are people still asking you basically the same things?
1000%, John. And I love that you brought. I love the frame, by the way. But you're absolutely right. But that's also normal. We
Right.
want them to. I'll give you an example, right? So let's say we take Tony Robbins. Tony
Right.
Robbins has been spitting the same track
Mm-hmm.
for the past 45 years.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the punchline. People want the same thing. Imagine we went to Unleash the Power Within, which is obviously his flagship event,
Yeah.
the cheaper one anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go there and he comes up to us and he goes, John, Brenden, you know what? I was thinking for this event, let's talk about porcupines instead for 3 days. What do you guys think? We're literally going to look at him and say no. Tony, no.
Hard no. Hard no.
No.
I didn't rearrange my schedule. I think of it as the best concert performers. Say, if to use a much more fluffy analogy of pop music, and I'm going to see Bruno Mars, and Bruno Mars chooses to do nothing but brand new material.
Worse, he does country music.
Oh, right. And you're like, hey, wait a minute. But so there is, I think that's great. I think the fact that you bring up, like, it's basically three things. It's the practice, the repetition, and I'm blanking of that sense of best serving the needs.
Asking the right
of
questions,
audience.
yeah.
Yeah, asking the right questions because of that. For you now, what is the question that you wish someone would ask you? That nobody asks you, nobody asks you, and you're like, God Almighty! What would be a question that you wish someone would ask you?
You'd be surprised how many times I get that question. Like so I kind of run out of questions.
Yep.
So I'm always open to creativity. I mean, the one that nobody asks me, which is really random, that I always like to answer, is why I still live with my mother.
Please answer that if you don't mind.
Of course, I'm happy to. So why is that? Because I coach a lot. And by the way, all my CEO clients, my executives, they all know I live with my mother. So it's not a question of this, and it's nothing to do with finances either. It's by a blog called Wait But Why by a guy named Tim Urban. And he explains this so well. He says the number of years that you have with your parents is significantly lower than the number of years that you have with your siblings or your friends, because your siblings and friends are relatively the same age as you, whereas you and your parents generally have a 20, 30, or 40-year gap. So like my dad passed away 3 years ago. And my mom's not sick or anything. She's in perfect health. But the way I think about it is like, I might as well enjoy the time that I have with her. That's why I stay close to my family, though I've thought about moving to New York or Florida to get more business.
Sure.
I've stayed here because it was more important to spend that time because I didn't want to regret it later in life.
I think it's beautiful. So my mom is 93 and a half. And so I
Wow, that's amazing.
It's amazing on her behalf. You know what I mean? It's like, but here's what I'll say. As time goes on, that's something that I would love. It's a personal request, talking about concerts and music and stuff like that. I don't want you to play country music, but what I would ask...
Please don't ask me to do
I
that.
wouldn't. You're in a very safe place there. You won't have to worry. But what I would say is, when somebody younger says that, I think that's so powerful. And I think it's so powerful because you actually even had to preface it yourself with, well, it's not about finances, but and it's like, and technically, I never asked you if it was about finances. I mean, my thought is, I remember the last thing I would have wanted to do would have been, well, living with your mom. But the fact of the matter is, it's a beautiful thing. We're lucky. I've got all my siblings live in the same general area with my mom, so we all pitch in, and my mom's in good health. I wouldn't say perfect health, but what I say to you is I think that is it's more than commendable. I just think it's the right thing to do, and it's beautiful. So I'm glad you answered it, because I think anybody could stand, like, there is no conditions or embarrassment or things like that. I'm just glad, for me personally, I'm glad my mom's here. My dad passed about 15 years ago, and every holiday is a little bit different. Every holiday, I mean, you evolve, you adjust, and all that sort of thing. You do. But it's like, I'm really glad. And if you get this chance, it's like, oh, awesome. Take it, man. Take it. And I'm really glad that you expressed that. That's really cool.
For sure, man. Happy to.
Absolutely. So let me ask you now. So as you've evolved And as you made that, like you talked about with summit of greatness, that that conscious decision, I'm going to do this as well too. Would you mind walking me through at least a couple of the steps as to how you laid the foundation in place?
For sure, for Mastertalk, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, John. So what happened when I left? So let's go back to Summit a little bit.
Yep.
Why did I realize I had an important thing to say?
Mhm.
Because I was talking to everybody at Summit, and they all said the same thing. Hey, I would really watch this content, and the second piece is I can't afford a coach. So I said, okay, clearly what I'm creating matters. Because the people at this conference, or in general, really want to do something important with their life. They really want to help people. I met a guy at Summit who wanted to eradicate loneliness. Like, wow, what a mission. Like, jeez, here I am trying to make YouTube videos in my mom's basement. This guy's eradicating loneliness. Like, my goddamn.
Well, Lewis talks about meaningful mission. What is your meaningful mission? And that's, to me, that's great. So now, please continue.
Right. So with that said, and like Lewis's is to eliminate self-doubt. That's his meaningful mission. But the key is now saying, okay, now I need to take this more seriously. So I invest, like I write a 5-figure check for my best friend, take money out of my bank account that was made from IBM, and I said, let's make these videos. So I start making them professionally. But there's one component I hadn't figured out that I got lucky with Vamsi, because I met him at Summit, who's my business partner.
That's great.
You know, he's been running a pretty successful coaching business for a while, and he just took a chance on me. So he actually gave me a ton of my first clients. That's how, because I had the skills. I just didn't know you could charge people money for this. And he was charging them a lot more than I would have charged them to work with me. So that's at least initially. And that's how I was able to build my book. So I realized that's what I was missing to go full time on it, that I fixed, is how do you build the business around it so you can spend all your day on your passion instead of spending, let's say, 80 hours a week, 70 hours a week at a company, at a job. And that was the last piece. So I saved up a bunch of money that I was working in my corporate gig. The second piece is I got really lucky with Clubhouse. I got on super early on that platform, and I was able to build up a following really fast and get a ton of clients. Beautiful. And then the third piece, I was able to get a lot of word of mouth from that, and eventually I was able to replace all my income, because it was really risky for me to quit my day job, by the way, because I retired my mom a long time ago. So I'm the only breadwinner in the house. I pay all the bills, like literally everything. So if I quit, and I was making really good money at IBM, so I really needed to make it work. So I took very little risk. I think I side hustled Master for 2.5 years, John. Like when you had met me, I was still
just going. Yeah. I mean,
Mastertalk like 3,000 subscribers or something. Like now Mastertalk is it's a lot bigger, and hopefully it continues that way. But that's the game.
That's just, I love the way that you're able to walk that through. You've also built up a very formidable YouTube following as well. I mean, your social media presence is just strong. Hey, folks, I would pipe in here. Brenden's consistency on top of the talent, but you talk about the repetition. You brought it up earlier, the repetition and all that sort of thing, is embodied in just the sheer volume that comes through. And I love that. I love that there's a very consistent format that, folks, when you see the way that you're positioned, the way that you speak, the way that you look at a camera, but the content just varies up, and I think I think it's tremendous. Lately, we'll just say fairly, like within the last 6 months, year, or whatever, as people have been coming out of COVID or like inching forward, have you felt more of the itch to move away from video to in-person?
Great question, John. I really like video, and I like online because it's scalable. You know, one lesson I learned in my life is in-person is impactful, but you can't change the world at mass scale. Why do I believe that? It's a very controversial opinion.
Yeah.
Because 90% of the people who follow me can't afford a flight to come see me in person, let alone afford my coaching packages. Forget that. That's a whole other ball game.
Yeah.
So because of that, a lot of my focus has been in the conversation we're having right now. You know, what's great about podcast guesting is it's a conversation, but that lasts the test of time. So you do it once, but in 5 years, let's say you're talking with someone, you go, oh yeah, you should talk to Brenden. Listen, I did a podcast with him 5 years ago. You can't do that at the speaking engagement. Sure, there's a couple that will be recorded one-offs, maybe you'll send them that French one. They won't understand half of it, but right, they'll be like, "Oh, it's cool, but what's the takeaway for me?"
Right?
But I think what's great about
Mhm,
podcasting is that
mhm,
conversation lasts forever, and that's really been my focus. Sure, I do some in person. I do a couple of
mhm,
speaking engagements,
mhm.
but most of my in person is going out to conferences, meeting other cool people.
I gotta tell you, I thank you for that. I love the way you break down in a video, like, I'm going to say the top three, or it's not even the top three tips, but it was more in the sense of the way that you break down the ability to best guest on a podcast. I loved this. I loved the fact of how you make it easy. And I think one of the greatest things in terms of being able to deliver a powerful message is it's not just to make it desirable and achievable, but it's just that you make it not relatively, you make it feel, oh God, I could do that. Will you is another question, but the fact of the matter is, but you could. I love when you bring up the fact about the podcast conversations being way more informal, and I was like, oh right, right. Do you prefer when you were like podcast becomes a collaborative conversation? What do you prefer in terms of your best way, in terms of your best strength in regards to a communicator, a collaborative effort or an individual effort where you're presenting?
Great question,
Mm-hmm.
John. I think about this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I would say for me personally,
Mm-hmm.
I like this more, the collaborative
Mm-hmm.
effort, and the reason is because of the nuance that I can draw from the host. So let's say, for
Mm-hmm.
example, I say something and it's not clear. You
Mm-hmm.
can easily go, "Hey, Brenden, that was really good, but could you just clarify this piece for the audience?"
Mm-hmm.
So it gives me an opportunity, A, to showcase my expertise.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not just a box. But the other piece, it's like, oh, okay, now it's clear. So, and that nuance
Mm-hmm.
also feeds into my evergreen content on
Mm-hmm.
YouTube. Oh, I don't clarify that enough on my YouTube channel, and that goes back. So I think they're both equally important. The individual is, I don't like it as much because it's a lot more work, but it's a lot more important that I do the individual, not the collaborative. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason is because the individual is what will last hundreds and hundreds of years after I'm gone. Because it's
Yep.
that one, okay, like when I make the how to talk on podcast
Mm-hmm.
video, I don't need to make it again. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the one video, it could last
Mm-hmm.
forever. The collaborative is, it's great, we're having this conversation, but it's not as optimized from a content creation perspective. I can't just listen to this for 5 minutes and get everything I need.
I love that you say that. I would also think as well too that as you talk about standing the test of time, that I would also think too that these conversations are often time sensitive, and so if we're talking about high performance sub X HPX in 2020 and it's 2067, well then you may not be a listener as engaged, or Lewis's summit of greatness in 2019. But you're right. I think that's the thing. Can you tell me of your individual presentations? What's the one that you feel like you just knew it worked? You just knew it resonated with the audience. You just could feel it more so than others. Is there a singular one, or do they all kind of feel that way?
There's definitely a singular one. It actually has nothing to do with my career. It was back
Mm-hmm.
when I was in college,
Okay.
when I had done case competitions. So
Mm-hmm.
how those practice sessions work, you're doing like 20, 30 practices, and then you get to the big competition, and then you either crush or you don't win.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew when we presented
Mm-hmm.
that we did really well. And we did. And that's that feeling when the judges look at you, they're shocked. They just go,
Mm-hmm.
"What? Like I've
Mm-hmm.
never seen, like this guy's speaking better than my vice president at the bank I'm working at. Like this is absolutely insane. Like how old is this kid?" Like so just like seeing the shock on their face,
Mm-hmm.
that's the reaction I go for. I don't get that thrill as much anymore in my career because it's always the same presentation over again. So I know it works.
Yeah.
So it's all a blur, but so it's like I know every time I present it's going to land,
Mm-hmm.
like on a podcast, hopefully, right? But when it comes to my case competition career, that's really where you
Mm-hmm.
see the shock.
Have you ever been surprised by where you really thought, well, this always lands? But have you ever been surprised whether pleasantly or unpleasantly in a way that you delivered it and you didn't get the reaction or the impact that you thought you would?
I mean, so many times, John. My goodness, I wish I could tell you that was perfect every time. I'll give you a funny one that's more
Yeah.
coaching related.
Thank you.
That's more it's more speaking. So when I started my career, when I
Right.
started working with VOMC, before I started coaching executives, I actually built a niche in kids. So I coached a lot of my clients as kids because I'm old enough where I'm mature, but I'm also young enough where I can relate to the kids. I don't do this as much anymore. So I had a big ego when I was coaching these kids because I was like, I'm coaching all these people. It's gonna be easy. But a lot of these kids were 5 years old. So I tell them, okay, team, we're gonna do a presentation. So naturally, let's say we call her Lori. Lori would ask me, 5-year-old Lori would ask me the right question. Brenden, what's a presentation? And I go, oh, right. So I'm like telling them all, this is how we structure this. Lori's like, Brenden, teacher, what's a presentation? I was like, oh yeah, no worries, Lori. So it's an introduction, conclusion, middle. And then she goes, what's an introduction? What's a conclusion? What's a middle? So it's a perfectly legitimate question to ask if you're a 5-year-old. So obviously, good ego check for me. I need to change the game. So I really had to force myself. How do I teach this to a 5-year-old? And then I thought of an analogy. Jigsaw puzzles. So I looked at Lori and I said, do you know puzzles? Lori goes, yeah, I love puzzles. And she goes, what pieces do you start with first? And she goes, oh, the edges. Because then I find all the corner pieces, but then I work in the middle. Surprisingly, a lot of kids know the answer to that. And then I just say, let's do the same thing, but with speaking. How about we do the edges first of the puzzle, then we work our way into the middle? And that's how I found the solution to that.
Oh my God, I love that because I think that fits with adults as well too. So, you get asked this every singular time. So I'm going to speak on behalf of not the 5-year-olds. They've got that covered, obviously. But let me ask in terms of the adults, right? So you do have a top 5 in regards to tips. I know them and I love them. Would you mind articulating now? Could we build the edges for people that are like, I need to say something that matters. I need you to hear it and I need it to land. What would be the 5 things that you typically deliver in terms of trying to help somebody do that?
For sure, John. So here's what I would say. This is a great example of how my ideas have evolved over time. So what you're referring to is the 5 public speaking tips, right? The ums and ahs, the asking the right questions to your audience, improving posture, the eye contact. But you know what I realized after sharing those tips? People never do them. So let me make this even simpler. What are the 3 exercises that we can practice today that people can take action on? But before I do it, let me give some context. Communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time. Right? So one of those balls is body language, one is storytelling, was the ums and ahs, one of them is smiling. So if we try and juggle all 18, all of them fall to the floor. So those 5 tip videos, in my opinion, is like ball 5 to 10. So what's ball 1 to 3, which I call my easy 3s. So I'll pause after each one. Number 1, the random word exercise. Pick a random word like computer screen, like light bulb, like trophy case, and create random presentations out of thin air. So it's literally, you pick tissue box, give a 60-second presentation on tissue box. That's exercise number 1. Exercise number 2 that you brought up is the question drill. Right. Get asked a hard question every day. If you do that once a day for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions. Number 3, pick 3 people you love the most in your life. And ideally, I'd do this 3 times a day and just send them a video message, just saying how grateful you are of having them in your life. That's it. You do all those 3, you'll get way better at communication in 30 days.
Give me the last one. So just because it just felt so damn good. So those video messages, do you have any structure to those for you when you send them, or you just send them from the heart?
Sure. So I do have a structure. But here's what I'll say, because I think it's more important than the structure. The answer is most people, John, in the world, they're not like us. They've never received a video message in their life. So if you just send them a video message, even if you're like groggy, you just woke up out of bed, you're going, John, really? It's going to mean so much to them. I actually get my clients' kids to do this, as I have the kids. It's because it's all about integrating it into your life. Like the random word exercise, the question, the trick is to actually do this with your kids if you have any, or nieces or nephews.
Yeah, and I do.
And when I have them, there you go. Yeah. And then what we have them do is we have the 8-year-old who isn't like a perfect speaker, send a video message to their grandmother, to their 46-year-old auntie. And it means so much to you. When you get a video message from an 8-year-old, you don't care what it sounds like. You don't judge them on the content. You just freak out. You're like, oh my God. So that's the key. It teaches us the right lesson, which is, what is communication for, John? Because a lot of us think communication is a chore, like doing the dishes. This sucks. That's not what communication is for. It's about creating a change. It's about creating impact. It's about leading a more fulfilling life.
I love that. So let me ask you this. What matters in terms of impact? What are some of the things right now in your field of scope as things evolve? What are some things that matter to you in regards to doing something about, to effect change?
For sure. I've always believed, John, and I don't think I've ever shared this on a podcast, so here's a new one at you. I believe every human being who wants to create change should solve 2 problems in their life. The first one is what I call the world's easiest problem, and the second one is the problem that we're uniquely positioned to solve for. So let's say you take me as an example.
Yeah.
The gift that I have is really to move somebody from A to B with their communication. Whether it's on a podcast and force them to take action where we don't overcomplicate things, like, okay, I got to do the random word, so I got to do this, or Brenden won't be happy with me. I just do that because that's what moves the ball. That's my gift. So one part of changing the world is putting all of your focus on just solving that. So I don't do anything else with my life besides enjoying it. So literally, this is the one focus. But then there's a second problem. The second problem is what I call the world's easiest problem to solve.
Okay.
Right. So a lot of people ask themselves the wrong question sometimes, which is, which problem are you passionate about solving? Which is great, but there's a lot of emotion tied into that. I think the other question that no one has ever asked is, out of every problem in the world, what is the easiest one and why? So now you can have a thoughtful debate around which one is easy. I think the water crisis is the easiest problem to solve, because if you don't have water, you can't do anything else. And it's already been solved for 90% of human beings, 92 or something. So that's why I'm a big fan of Scott Harrison's work. So my life is pretty simple. Be the best communication coach that's ever lived so that I can democratize the information and become the next Dale Carnegie. That's my whole life's focus. And thankfully for me, time's on my side, so I can pull this off, hopefully. And that will require my whole life. Focusing, getting on 100 interviews a week, doing the YouTube video, stay focused, consistent. Love that you brought that up. Just that alone will take up most of my life. And then with the money that I make, the impact, the connections, I help Scott solve the problem that I already know he's positioned to solve. He just needs more money to solve it. That's it.
More money and a little bit more time and a little bit more expertise. I think you just answered my last question, but I'll ask it anyway. In addition to Scott, who else inspires you?
Tough question, because there's so many. I mean, you inspire me in so many ways. I love the effort that you put into. I love the effort you put into this interview. It really means a lot to me personally. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. So obviously there's my mother, right? Big fan of her. She's taught me a lot about life, but we can't learn from my mother because she's a private person. Okay. So what I'll say is the person that inspires me besides Scott Harrison, it's probably Seth Godin. The reason is because Seth Godin, even now, he's like 63 years old at this point. He's still creating a podcast every week. He's still showing up. He's still writing books. He's still doing interviews. And he has that same energy that he had when he was 23. And that's so motivating for me, because the guy's already a multi-decade millionaire at this point. So for me, it's saying, like, it's not about the money. It's about saying, I need to leave empty. I need to leave with all of my thought leadership on the table, because I can't create me anymore. And that's what I try and do with my work, right? Even with the success I have, I keep pushing. What can I learn from John? What's one question he asked me today that I didn't make a video on that I need to? John got me there. It's like, I need to keep pushing, and I'll do that until I'm dead.
Well, I love that energy. I'm going to say this. In addition to your website, mastertalk.ca, where else are the best places to find you?
Absolutely, John. Wonderful conversation. Thanks for having me. So
Oh my
two
God,
ways
my
to
pleasure.
it was so fun. So two ways to keep in touch. One is definitely the Mastertalk YouTube channel. Just go to Mastertalk in one word. You'll have access to all the free goodies there. And the second way to keep in touch is to go to rockstarcommunicator.com. So this is where I do a free 90-minute workshop on communication. I facilitate it myself. It's live and it's on Zoom. And if you want to jump in on it, it's free. Everyone's invited. You can be a kid. You can be an executive. Jump in on that free training. You can see everything that I do live.
I love every bit of this. Folks, we're going to make this easy. We're going to have these links at the bottom of the podcast so you don't have to guess or did I type it correctly. We're going to make this work for you. Brenden from Mastertalk, I am honored that you showed up for me today. I acknowledge you, your effort, your impact. I'm really grateful. Thanks for making time for me, man.
Thanks, brother.
And lastly, I'll just say this to everyone listening as well, which is, again, as a reminder, the reason we do this is to help you find your best, most true, authentic voice when it matters, so that you have the tools. So if you're nervous, uncomfortable, something needs to be said, you get to say them, because I've got great people like Brenden that are sharing their experience. Give this one a listen, and more than once. There's a ton of information that this quite talented soul just dropped, and I'm very grateful. Folks, keep watching, keep liking, keep sharing, keep finding us on iHeartMedia, Odyssey, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, all those places, you know, and our YouTube channel as well, too. This is John Duffin from Duffin Media. Thanks so much for tuning in for another episode of Your Message Received. We love having you on board. One more time, Brenden. Thank you, sir. Be well.
And now, making its way across the finish line, Your Message Received has been a production of Duffin Media.